Hello everyone, my name is Dmitry and today I want to tell you about how the so-called August Putsch of 1991 finally destroyed the Soviet Union. Who fought for what it led to and what Swan Lake has to do with it. You will find out in this video. Enjoy watching. A group of Soviet officials disagreed with the policy of the first and also the only and last president of the USSR, Mikhail Gorbachev. Since the mid-1980s, he pursued a policy of perestroika, advocated the democratization of society, glasnost, the abolition of censorship, and economic reforms. Some officials from the Soviet elite did not like it. They perceived such steps as approaching the collapse of the Union, which they did not want. However, Gorbachev was not going to break up the Union, it was only about its reorganization. Such plans appeared in 1990. Instead of the USSR, they were going to create the SSG, a union of sovereign states, and thus give the republics more freedoms while formally preserving a single country. Not all Union republics were going to join the SSG. The so-called Part of Autonomies began back in 1988. One after another, the republics began to adopt Declaration of Sovereignty. By the time of the August Coup, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Armenia and Georgia has already declared their independence. In March 1991, the all-union referendum was held. The majority of citizens voted for the preservation and renewal of the USSR. A draft resolution on the Union of Sovereign Republics states was adopted which would update the USSR. It was planned that the document would be signed on August 20th, but this did not take place due to the coup. Eight high-ranking Soviet officials, including those the Ministry of Defense, the KGB and the Interior Ministry, formed a self-proclaimed body, the State Emergency Committee, GKCHP. The GKCHP includes Gennady Anayev, Vice President of the USSR, Oleg Baklanov, First Deputy Chairman of the Defense Council, Vladimir Kryuchkov, Chairman of the KGB of the USSR, Valentin Pavlov, Prime Minister of the USSR, Boris Puga, Minister of Internal Affairs of the USSR, Vasily Starodubtsev, Chairman of the Peasants' Union of the USSR, Alexander Tizyakov, President of the Association of State Enterprises and Object of Industry, Construction, Transport and Communication of the USSR, Dmitry Yazov, Minister of Defense. The members of the GKCHP not only feared the collapse of the party system and the union, but also worried about their own places in power, which they of course wanted to preserve. In August of 91, Gorbachev was on vacation in the Crimea. On August 18th, the head of the presidential apparatus Varily Boldin, two secretaries of the Central Committee of the CPSU and the commander of the ground forces General Valentin Varennikov came to his dacha. They wanted to discuss with the president the introduction of a state of emergency in the country and persuade him to make concessions, resign his powers. Gorbachev refused. After that, all communication was disconnected in the residence, although the participants of the State Emergency Committee denied this in their memories. The dacha was surrounded by the Sevastopol regiment of the border troops. The presidential plane and helicopter were blocked at the airport by order of the Chief of Staff of the USSR Air Defense Forces, General Igor Maltsev. The State Emergency Committee announced on television about the president's illness, which did not exist, and his powers were transferred to Gennady Anayev, Vice President of the USSR. On August 19th, early in the morning, Dmitry Yazov, the Minister of Defense and a member of the State Emergency Committee, ordered troops to enter Moscow. Tanks and armored personnel carriers turned out to be on the main streets and squares of the city. The television center in Ostankino, the central telegraph, radio stations were taken under the protection of the landing troops. The first resolution of the State Emergency Committee ordered to suspend the activities of political parties and public organizations, banned rallies and street processions. The second prohibited the publication of all but 9 newspapers: Труд, Рабочая Трибуна, Известия, Правда, Красная Звезда, Soviet Russia, Московская Правда, Lenin's Banner, Real Life. Journalists of several leading newspapers then united and published a general newspaper in which they gave an alternative point of view from the position of the GKCHP. The same thing was on TV all day, newscasts mixed with ballads when lake and classical music. In the late afternoon, the classics were interrupted. A press conference of the members of the State Emergency Committee was held in the Foreign Ministry building. Soviet and foreign journalists gathered there. According to the recollections of those present, there was no free space in the hall. At first, everything went smoothly. Press conference and press conference. But at some point, the journalist of Независимая газета Татьяна Malkina asked a bold, iconic question. Tell me please, do you understand that you have committed a coup d'etat tonight? And which of the comparisons seems more correct to you, from 1917, when the October Revolution took place, or 1964, when Khrushchev was removed from power? The center of resistance to the coup was the House of Soviets, now Government House of the Russian Federation or the White House. In the 91st year, the Supreme Council of RSFSR, Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, was located there and the headquarters of the GKCHP resistance was located there. The leadership of the RFSR, led by President Boris Yeltsin, Gorbachev was the president of the USSR at the time, but each republic also had its own president, called the actions of the State Emergency Committee a coup d'etat and called on supporters to defend the White House. After an attempt by the Emergency Committee to declare a state of emergency and impose a curfew, a spontaneous rally formed near the White House. On the afternoon of August 19th, Yeltsin came out to the audience and read out his famous address from one of the tanks standing outside the building. We believe that such forceful methods are unacceptable. They discredit the USSR in front of the whole world, undermine our prestige in the world community, return us to the era of the Cold War and the isolation of the Soviet Union. All this forces us to declare illegal the so-called emergency committee that came to power. Accordingly, we declare all decisions and orders of this committee illegal. The gathered people began to form militia detachments, build barricades of paving stones, benches, garbage cans and other improved means. There was also armed people in the building, security guards, employees of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. On the night of August 21st, they were joined by armed cadets of Russian police schools. It was reported that the volunteers were being given bulletproof vests and machine guns. By the evening of August 20th, there were, according to some estimates, several 100,000 people around the White House. Judging by the documents and eyewitness accounts, there were a variety of people, from intellectuals, students and veterans of war in Afghanistan to leaders. The leaders of the resistance urged the audience not to provoke the military, but to join hands and stand at some distance from the building. At the same time, an order was given to the armed guards in the event on an assault to shoot and the attackers to defeat. During the events in Moscow, 3 defenders of the White House, Ilya Krychevsky, Dmitry Kamar and Vladimir Yuzov, were killed under tank tracks. On August 21st, the defenders of the White House collided with a column of armored vehicles on the Garda Ring, following the instructions of the military commandant of Moscow, appointed by the State Emergency Committee. On August 24th, the Prosecutor General of the RSFSR, Valentin Stepankov, issued a decree on the arrest of members of the GKCHP. Gorbachev flies from Foros to Moscow. On August 22nd, members of the GKCHP and their allies were placed in the Matrosskaya Tishina prison. On January 14, 1992, the investigation into the GKCHP case was completed. By January 1993, all the accused were released from custody on their own recognize and they were amnested. On August 22nd, a rally of defenders of democracy was held, at which people carried a huge banner of the new Russian tricolor flag. It was officially recognized by the Supreme Soviet as the national flag of the USSR. August 22nd became the day of the state flag of Russia.